Bueno, bienvenidos a este segundo día del Nodo de Investigaciones Militantes. Yo soy Celina, trabajo en el área de Museo en Red del Museo de Reina Sofía. Nosotras trabajamos desarrollando diálogos y conversaciones colectivas sostenidas con distintos colectivos y redes de artistas, investigadoras y artistas, tanto a nivel local, de aquí del barrio de Lavapiés, como a nivel del Estado español y a nivel internacional. Tenemos ahí varias redes. Y bueno, por otro lado, el Centro de Estudios del Museo propuso este año Tejidos Conjuntivos, que es un programa de estudios propio, experimental, de duración anual, en el que confluyen distintos perfiles e intereses que tienen que ver con la museología, la práctica artística, las humanidades, la gestión cultural, la imaginación política. Y en este marco, desde Museo en Red, convocamos a algunas de las redes con las que trabajamos para pensar colectivamente sobre esto que llamamos investigación militante, que tiene que ver con esas prácticas de producción de conocimiento que no buscan, digamos, interpretar el mundo, sino generar espacios de organización para transformarlo, de alguna forma, nos gusta decir poéticamente. Bueno, y aquí hoy es la segunda sesión de este nodo del Instituto de Imaginación Radical. Vamos a tener la primera mesa llamada Aproximación a las Pedagogías Radicales, donde Maddalena Fragnito, Elena Blesa Cábez y Theo Prodromidis hablarán sobre Raising Care, que se define como una plataforma que reúne a personas que luchan por distribuir los cuidados dentro o fuera de sus colectivos. Vamos a comenzar con esta mesa. Luego va a haber una pequeña pausa y tendremos la segunda mesa del día, que se llama El común y lo jurídico, herramientas y estrategias, que va a retomar un poco lo que estuvimos trabajando justo hoy por la mañana en el Centro Social Autogestionado de la Tabacalera de Lavapiés, y pensar juntas y poner sobre la mesa algunas de estas estrategias jurídicas y modos de hacer que se dan en los centros sociales autogestionados aquí en España y en otros lugares del mundo. Así que bueno, vamos a comenzar con la sesión de hoy. La dejo a Elena.
Vale, antes que nada, buenas tardes. Va a arrancar Maddalena, no sé si está conectada ya.
Hola, hola.
Una breve presentación de las compañeras, ¿no? O sea,
También.
digo, hay una breve bio de las compañeras para que estemos todas en la misma página. Elena Blesa Cábez es educadora, artista e investigadora. Su trabajo se sitúa en un punto entre la pedagogía y la producción artística. Su investigación se desarrolla principalmente desde metodologías colectivas con una aproximación transfeminista. Desde 2018 es artista residente en FASE, Espacio de Creación y Pensamiento del Hospital de Llobregat de Barcelona, y es parte de la plataforma asamblearia de artistas de Cataluña, así como también del Instituto de Imaginación Radical. Theo, que también nos estará acompañando hoy, es artista visual y cineasta, ha formado parte de Future Climates, de School of Redistribution, del proyecto PRESS, de la Universidad Abierta Helénica y el programa To Care for Another, Radical Politics of Care. Es miembro cofundador del IRI, voluntario y miembro del Consejo de la Escuela Abierta para Inmigrantes del Pireo de Grecia y miembro de la Red de Escuelas Solidarias de Grecia. Y luego Maddalena Fragnito es una artista y activista que explora las intersecciones entre transfeminismos y tecnologías al enfocarse en prácticas de cuidado común. Actualmente es estudiante de doctorado del Center for Post-Digital Cultures de la Coventry University y forma parte del IRI. Ahora sí.
Vale, pues como iba diciendo, hemos dividido nuestra sesión en dos partes. Entonces, Maddalena os ofrecerá como una aproximación más general a lo que implican las prácticas del cuidado en la investigación militante desde una perspectiva transfeminista, para después, entre Theo y yo, poderos hacer ya una explicación más aterrizada en lo que fue Raising Care como una experiencia en particular. Entonces, Maddalena, cuando quieras.
Ya estoy. Ok. Bueno, hola a todas. Perdona, pero voy a hablar en inglés esta vez. Entonces, good morning, everyone. And Thank you for being here, and also thank you for organizing this series of meetings, which besides being extremely topical and necessary, I think also allow us to meet again at a time when many neo-fascist governments are gaining ground quickly and before our very eyes, except in Spain, and probably this is no coincidence. So I am Maddalena Fragnito. I come from Italy, where right in these hours, the government is removing last immigration protections. It has erased the already miserable form of social protection called reddito di cittadinanza, which is a form of citizen income, where just a month ago, the right of over 10,000 minors, children of same-sex families, were suddenly denied, where public schools have been occupied for the last month by army cops, teaching children, let's say, the cult of war, and also by pro-life, or rather it's better to say no choice, anti-abortion lobbies that are offering credits to those students who attend their criminal medical meetings against women's self-determination. So the list can go on and on. It's just to say thanks again for this opportunity to gather internationally to share what we are working on, our forms of struggle and our imaginaries, but also to share how things can change quite fast locally, and accordingly to who we are, it can become very bad in the blink of an eye. So today I will start talking a bit on rising care. I will take 20-25 minutes. So rising care, these political gatherings we facilitate during the pandemic among several autonomous practices providing care differently. That is, fighting against the way in which care is organized under capitalism, no? That model which transforms bodies and ecosystem into resources to be appropriated. But let's start from the very beginning. So when the pandemic hits or exploded, many of us found not only loathed by the, let's say, the multiplication of care work individually delegated due to governments that in no way supported public infrastructure capable of sharing the burden of the crisis, public infrastructure already devastated by decades of privatization everywhere in Europe. But also we find ourselves in the difficult situation of having to protect our pirate infrastructure and alter institutions of care, precisely those that we had to build in the last decades to make up for the lack of public care provision. For instance, the lack of public kindergartens, or to guarantee an abortion for all, or to find solutions to increasingly new forms of expulsion from the cities, to save lives, people in the Mediterranean Sea, to invent forms of otherwise income, and so on. No? So during those months, the pandemic, many of us start to work both online and offline, of course, trying to keep track of this effort, and also to capture similar practices that were multiplying due to the crisis, no? And this is the case of many digital archives and syllabi that have been collectively compiled and published, such as the Pirate Care one, in which I have also contributed, but also many others, such as the Chinese volunteers or Constant and blah, blah, blah. No? So despite this, after some months, however, issues and priority changed. No? From the perspective of the practices, online and how-to-do lists was not enough. So problems were growing, questions were changing fast, and most of all, reflection on the very crucial aspect of our practices, that is care, were moving fast and in different ways in order to not be captured by the system, no? So it was necessary at that moment to meet directly, to confront, to stand one by one, despite all, in whatever situation, to exchange not just manuals, but rather new points of view, new questions, to discuss, to questioning together. And this questioning together is the method that Rising Care put at the center. And this is what we will discuss today. No? This questioning together has a militant practices, this exercise of common reflection, which aimed at facing together a very changing and fast landscape, where the decisions around death and life also depended on our ability to intervene within the care gaps of the state. So questioning together comes from anywhere. Perhaps the Zapatistas caminar preguntando, moving forward by questioning together, is the main reference, but is a technique that has been used by many political groups. However, to keep it simple, caminar preguntando also reflects the very way care ethics differentiate with other ethics. Let's think, for instance, at the difference, at this specific difference. On the one side, the ethics of justice, which produces universal principle. This is right and this is wrong, no? On the other side, within care practices, these unquestionable principles are often not so productive, whereas specific solutions to particular problems are part of a continuous and never-ending questioning, thus a never-ending construction of value. So in other words, different qualities of what is right and what is wrong, of what works and what don't work, always coexist in specific and situated practices. And even failure within the ethics of care never remain a static nor a negative result. What comes after failure of a particular care practices is indeed relatively unknown, no? It remains an open field, I would say. I will try again, I'll try differently, I'll try harder to fix this bone, to bondage this leg, to distract the child from crying, to grow a sweeter tomato. So we find this questioning and re-questioning in the practices of care itself, no? Which is important to not forget that this caring is a specialized work that improves over time, and also that improves when the condition of experimentation improve, when we have spaces, when we have time, resources, and tools to experiment. From this perspective, caring is a cooperation between humans and non-humans entities, technologies and environments that adapt to the material condition of specific situation and context, and that grows other careers according to that specific material condition. Caring is, as Anna Maria Moll puts it, an endless tinkering. So, but let's go back to Rising Care, no? And to the need of connecting different infrastructures, providing alternative care provisions, to this living archive, I would say, of embodied practices, and to their non-ephemeral character of dismantling a social model that produces death. Probably it's important also to take some minutes to analyze the context in which this series of meetings, Rising Care, were organized. So how the pandemic was running on our bodies, or using other words, it is important to wear for some minutes more the lens of the pandemic, because this specific crisis, which is many crises together, of course, gave us the opportunity to see the violence and the paradox of the system in which we live, probably with more clarity, no? Therefore, we could state that it has been a moment where social reproduction has become a key interpretative method. For instance, at the beginning of the pandemic, Arundhati Roy, which is an Indian writer, defined the crisis as a portal that could have the potential to open from within the disaster a collective debate around what we need and what we should start to get rid of if we want to think at the future. So this is a perspective that stimulates a radical reflection on how humans live on the planet, on life itself, and the inequalities, no, that run through it. In the same month, Kinaga Yamata Taylor wrote, "Life has been suddenly and dramatically appended, and when things are turned upside down, the bottom is brought to the surface and exposed to light." And this is the reason why Alessandra Mezzadri described the pandemic as a magnifying glass, which permits to reflect on the features of capitalism. What I think at the pandemic is that this crisis highlighted many of our societal necropolitical assumptions, starting from the division between those who received healthcare and those who did not, and the social composition of who bore the heaviest burden of care labor needed to face the crisis. So this perspective allows me, at least, to reflect on how the capitalist organization of care produces and reproduces our society's necropolitical assumption, using, of course, Achille Mbembe framework. And again, what is safe and what not, on whom the burden of care labor falls, who lives and who only can afford to survive, are decisions at the very heart of every society, and these decisions are historically formalized by different models of care labor organization. Thus, when we look at the pandemic with the lens of care, this requires us to read not only the causes of the causes and the pandemic, connecting one crisis to the other, past and future, but also to read COVID-19 months through the choices that we have made or not have been made around increasingly pressing social needs, no, for care. So all these are crucial questions that we as collective, we were facing with. This is the reason probably why our first need as communities working on this topic was to use social reproduction as a method in order to read the context, a feminist method that would have helped us to look through the magnifying glass of pandemic specific crisis, no? And following this path, pandemic can be understood as a triple crisis of social reproduction, hitting both the organization of capitalism and capitalist life, since it has deepened inequalities, reorganizing the governance of capitalist life. It has organized all the new work dichotomy, intensifying work and its exploitation. And finally, it has revealed multiple processes of letting die, making more visible the surplus population and how the question of life and death is defined according to different spaces and body. Indeed, as we were saying before, let live or let die is a key planetary reproductive question, no? Who dies, who is allowed to live, and in which condition is the result of social reproductive regime. Thus, the power to dictate how some may live and or not, where death is also intended not just literally, but social and political, no? Shows us the continuity between past and present forms of violence, inequalities, and oppression, the main colony of the body, as Federici would put it. So, unfortunately, this triple and multiple crises did not move towards a shift away from the neoliberalism regime, from its policies, or let's say from its unequal outcomes, whether it has instead strengthened this regime. Let's think, for instance, at how half of the COVID-19 fund went to privates or intermediaries, so that, I quote again Alessandra Mezzadri, the cure seems incredibly similar to the disease. So this is probably one of the reasons why it becomes clearer that we live in a context in which capitalism speculates directly on the risk of living. So the second, let's say, paradox we experienced in first person during the crisis is that one related to how the word care itself has been used and abused. No? On the one hand, the pandemic highlighted the existence of material interdependencies among humans, non-human entities, the fragility of life, and therefore the collective and inescapable need for care. And this broadened many people's understanding of the political value of caring. However, on the other hand, care became a crucial concept also within the political and economic agenda of governments and private companies. So what we have experienced is this proliferation of the lexicon of care, the fact that it has been mentioned very often during last crisis, and not always in the best way, no? So let's take some example. In the first month of the contagion, for instance, the Italian government came out with a reassuring legislative decree named Cura Italia, which translated is Caring Italy, that made normally invisible sectors such as elderly care and domestic work, the very sector that turned out to be crucial in pandemic management. At the same time, another example, in India, then the Prime Minister Narendra Modi launched the PM Care, a fund open to private donation in order to resolve the health crisis that soon after was engulfed by in criticism when the country was close to the collapse. No? At the same time, big tech companies were calling for more public investments to upgrade their private infrastructure, reducing funds to sectors such as health and education, public sector, I mean, no? With the promise, I quote, to give more health and care protection for the global community. So everyone were using this this word, no? So in this complex and let's say ambiguous context, one could ask if we can refer to that moment, to this proliferation of care as to a care turn, no? But from our perspective, the answer would be no, not exactly, not really, for at least three main reasons. The first one is because despite the instrumental proliferation by governments and private corporations, the reality is that feminist, transfeminist, ecofeminist, and anti-racist perspective have questioned care and its domain long before the pandemic. And this trajectory show us, let's say, how crucial caring has always been in terms of social organization, you know, and how it is implicated in connection and disconnection, as Laura Conti would say, that occurs between the various living and non-living entities that cohabit this planet. Secondly, because of what Cristina Morini observed, that is, the capitalist interest in care is not new too, no? Over the last few decades, care has already become a code, a know-how to be put to work, and a governance strategy, no? It's to say that quality such as one associated with women activities, caring, emotional investments, attention, or the ability to do many things at the same time, have become an integral part of employment, relationships, and an asset in the economy of precarity. Third and last is probably related to François Berger's question, which you see in the monitor. Have we ever ceased to care? And actually the answer is no. In each crisis, people affected by the crisis organize themselves in order to survive. No, alternative and conflictual practices of caring has an underground railway, have always been there, are always there. No, Berger wrote really crucial words that probably are at the basis of what rising care represents and want to strengthen. I quote, there has long been a living archive of caring practices. The media present them as ephemeral and exceptional, but they are part of an underground current of resistance, of the effort to preserve humanity in a regime of dehumanization. Radical care is not a philosophical abstraction for academics. It consists in taking risks, refusing to obey unjust law, to comply with unjust norms, to endorse inequalities, patriarchy, and racism, end quote. So, although agreeing with François Berger on the fact that in each crisis, people affected by the crisis organize themselves in order to survive, that conflictual practices of caring have always been there. In other words, that this crisis is nothing new, specifically if we read it with the colonial lens. And here I want to quote another small text, that very strong and poetic sentence you can find in the Rethinking Apocalypse, Indigenous Anti-Futurist Manifesto, which you have the cover on the monitor, which says, many worlds have gone before this one. So a text that was written during the pandemic too, and that described how the end of the world has already come several times, according to which perspective you look at it, no? So despite this, however, we think that these terrible times brings at least one main difference from before, which is the issue of global limits, no? So during the pandemic crisis, probably also for its entanglement with the environmental one, the image of humanity struggling against its self-destruction has emerged more coolly, no? And this is because we are interdependent and materially connected, and this was quite clear, no, during those months. It is because each of us depends at least once in our life on the care work performed by others, and also it is because we are eco-dependent and we interact with the medium of nature, its resources and its limits. So on the one hand, there are the primary conditions that guarantee life, and on the other hand, there is an ecological ceiling. And within these boundaries, I particularly agree with Yayo Herrero when she argued that the unavoidability of limits brings to one main last question, which is, will the limit be given by fascism or by commoning? In other words, how do we crash better, or also what is a livable life? So probably this ceiling, this global ceiling, is what makes nowadays crisis different from those before. This is terrible, but it is also a terrific opportunity to learn differently, to care differently, to work differently, to cohabitate differently, and also to die differently, no? And this opportunity, this portal, to quote again Arundhati Roy, is exactly the reason why questioning together with a group of conflictual care practices, meaning against the capitalist mainstream care model of organization, has been during the pandemic very crucial for us, and it is so still nowadays, no? In fact, in order to reorient into a context in which care was in the mouth of everyone, we needed to create distinction and specify different cartography, no? We needed to state that care practices are not conflictual per se, nor is there always a conflictual aspect to care. On the contrary, there is always care in conflict, no? In practices of rebellion, in practices that refuse the oppressive system that organize us. And this is because every struggle against the dominant economic, social, and political model always brings a different model of organization of life and death, no? Thus on the organization of social reproduction, a different model that conflicts directly with the dominant one, no? To synthesize in every form of refusal, there is a model or several models of care, but not necessarily every care activity is a form of conflict, no? So creating this distinction, even if overly simplistic, helps to define one of the main internal logic that drives conflictual care practices. It brings to surface probably one of their main question, that is, which social relation are worth reproducing and which one need to be undone, no? To be cut in order to transform the condition of life in common. In other words, which care practice can generate other worlds. In a sci-fi book titled The Broken Heart Trilogy by Jamie Zinn, the main character says at the moment, I don't want you to fix this. What I want you to do is to make it worse. No, this is the logic of not fixing everything. No, and probably of undoing has a way of building otherwise. No. The logic of unworldling has a way of learning differently. The logic of not putting always the things right back, but rather abolish, cut, and destroy what the French street cleaners, for instance, the garbage collector, are teaching us so magnificently in this last month from my perspective. Indeed, although acknowledging, no, together with Ni Una Meno transfeminist movement, the difficulties and the specificity of striking within the reproductive sphere, within care, that is the impossibilities to reduce care labor in certain circumstances, we need also to recognize the power of when it happens, which is the famous statement, if we stop, the world stops, no? So to conclude, as feminist and anti-racist perspective point out, since very long time, the field of care is crossed by asymmetries that determine its organization and distribution. And although care is a matter of enmeshed interdependence and relationship, which shows how we are related, no? Among us, but also with a planetary milieu. It is also crucial to acknowledge care as devalued work, traditionally excluded from the spheres of politics and economics. And this means that although caring concerns everyone, some dominant subjects of modernity, particularly white men, have enjoyed and continue to enjoy the privilege of delegating care to other bodies, no? In the word of Pascal Molinier, care is a neuralgic zone of conflict, tension, hesitation, ambivalences. And from this point of view, the lexicon of care and caring lends itself to ambiguous reading, which we must discover and uncover, no? And from our perspective, what is at stake nowadays and what we try to do with Rising Care is thus to analyze, to practice, and to strengthen the way in which our alternative care infrastructures, rising from the urgency of finding answers to essential needs, conceive and socialize care, and also produce and perform counter-imaginaries, no? That is how we question the issue of limits and in what ways our assemblages reworld, how they prefigure other forms of living in common. So I think I will stop here and pass the mic to Elena and to Theo in order to continue the narrative. Thank you.
Vale, gracias Maddalena por tu por tu explicación, por ser tan generosa compartiendo y situando todo lo que es el marco en el que decidimos mover Raising Care como proyecto, como acción. Raising Care nace como plataforma, es una plataforma en la que se agrupan distintos colectivos que intentan de alguna manera poner en acción algunos de los conceptos con los que ha estado navegando Maddalena. El primero que queríamos compartir sería la idea de investigar preguntándonos. Por lo tanto, decidimos generar Raising Care o entenderla como una plataforma desde la que ir interrogándonos, ir compartiendo distintas preguntas para de alguna manera poder también compartir herramientas con las que intentar trabajar cada cual desde su marco de actuación, entendiendo las singularidades de cada uno de los colectivos, las particularidades de cada uno de los colectivos que formaban parte de la plataforma, pero también entendiendo que desde sus marcos de trabajo, cada una de estas plataformas tenían también herramientas que poner en juego de manera colectiva con los demás participantes de Raising Care. A partir de aquí, damos algunas preguntas como ¿quién cuida a los que cuidan o a las que cuidan? Normalmente sería más interesante traducir la pregunta en femenino. Está muy bien usar el neutro, pero en este caso creo que es importante también incidir en la feminización de los cuidados. Otra de las preguntas que nos interesaban era si el cuidado per se implica prácticas de resistencia. También navegamos por la idea de si podíamos cuidar o ser cuidados desde la distancia, entendiendo también el marco de trabajo en el que arranca Raising Care en plena pandemia. Tened en cuenta también que los primeros encuentros de esta plataforma son a distancia, son online, es un momento como de mucha sobrecarga también de lo que es el contacto, qué puede ser el contacto cuando nos obligan a estar separadas, con lo cual la pregunta de las distancias era un eje vertebrador también de muchas de nuestras conversaciones. A partir de aquí tenemos esta herramienta que fue un fanzine, una pequeña publicación autoeditada para poder ir activando los encuentros de Raising Care como plataforma, pero creo que es interesante antes enmarcar un poco de qué hablamos cuando hablamos de los colectivos de la plataforma de Raising Care. Hemos tenido un problema al al bajar la presentación, entonces me disculpáis si no se ve bien, os sitúo un poco. La asamblea Raising Care, una asamblea de colectivas, estaba conformada por la Asociación Mesa de Mayores de Usera, la Brigada Voluntaria por la Emergencia desde Italia, Obiezione Respinta desde Italia, la Open School para Migrantes del Pireo en Grecia, SCART de Serbia y Territorio Doméstico. Entonces, para nosotras es interesante haber llamado o haber tomado parte de esta asamblea que lo que pretendía de algún modo era poner sobre la mesa una discusión sobre las distintas prácticas que realizaban cada uno de estos colectivos desde sus contextos particulares, entendiendo que lo que queríamos era generar una plataforma donde conectar las distintas luchas y generar un espacio donde compartir prácticas, no para que estas funcionasen a modo de manual, consideramos que esto es casi imposible. Las prácticas de los colectivos, tanto los colectivos como nuestras propias prácticas, son unas prácticas situadas y ancladas a un contexto que las condiciona, las modela y también las acompaña, con lo cual era importante entender que lo que queríamos era poner en común las distintas prácticas para compartir qué puede ser útil al resto de los colectivos, ofreciendo lo que hablaríamos casi, hablando de una, como dice Aurora Beringer, como una metodología artesanal, entendiendo que tú te vas nutriendo de un conjunto de prácticas que no están su utilización o su puesta en acción no está tan predeterminada como para que puedas tener flexibilidad y las puedas ir modulando cada vez que te interesa poner en juego una de estas distintas prácticas en tu investigación o en tus acciones. No es una metodología que venga completamente predeterminada y lo que te permite es Es una adaptación al contexto en el que pones en juego cada una de estas herramientas que comentábamos. A partir de aquí, sí que entendíamos que son unos procesos que no tienen un final, como apuntaba Maddalena en su introducción. Son procesos situados y específicos que van modificándose, van alterándose, van desplazándose, pero que no terminan. Raising Care no lo damos por terminado, igual que muchos de estos colectivos siguen en activo. Pueden terminar algunos de los colectivos como tal, pero no las prácticas que están poniendo en juego. Y nosotros como Raising Care decidimos de alguna manera enmarcar la conversación alrededor del lenguaje que utilizan los colectivos a muchos niveles. El lenguaje artístico, el lenguaje hablado, el lenguaje estructural que mueven cada una de estas colectivas, las herramientas que ponen en juego y las personas que configuran sus redes de actuación, tanto para dentro del colectivo como hacia afuera. Entonces, nuestras conversaciones se articularon alrededor de estos tres ejes y tomaron la forma al principio de conversatorio online. Era la única manera que teníamos de encontrarnos. Ahora estas imágenes son horribles, nos llevan al peor de estos momentos encerradas, pero sí que era reconfortante encontrar espacios, aunque fuesen virtuales, de encuentro con todo este grupo de gente. Organizamos 4 encuentros, uno más a puerta cerrada para que los colectivos se conociesen entre ellos. Queríamos generar un espacio también de intercambio real entre las personas que formaban parte, entonces era importante generar una complicidad y un encuentro previo antes de abrir esto a público. Y después llamamos a 3 sesiones abiertas, cuidados por las personas, cuidados por las herramientas y cuidados por el lenguaje, entendiendo que aunque las prácticas de todas se van cruzando y que es muy difícil distinguir lo que es un lenguaje, lo que es una herramienta y que se van cruzando, que al final son mecanismos de construcción y de afectación de lo real y de lo simbólico, que no son separables para nosotros, pero sí que de alguna manera pusimos procesos o propuestas que podían tener algo en común desde sus particularidades en conversaciones muy descendidas y abiertas que tuvieron lugar durante no la pandemia más cerrada, pero sí los meses justo posteriores. Y aquí finalmente pudimos llamar a una asamblea ya abierta, una asamblea real, física y muy amorosa, cuando nos pudimos encontrar en 2021 en Madrid, en el marco del encuentro con las zapatistas. Entonces llamamos a los colectivos que habían participado de Raising Care como plataforma online, los convocamos para hacer unas jornadas y unos encuentros y ponernos cuerpo, que era también lo que nos faltaba, que decidimos localizar en La Villana, en Vallecas. Sé que ahora se están cambiando de espacio. Este es el que tenían, no sé si se han movido o no. Esta es la que tenían, el espacio en el que estaban hasta la fecha. Y bueno, realmente fue después de haber estado separadas y haber puesto sobre la mesa y de haber dado el tiempo para que nos explicasen cada una sus herramientas y cómo las activaban, aquel fue un momento para volver a lanzar, a partir del fanzine que os enseñábamos de cuidados, volver a lanzar las preguntas, intentar responderlas. A mí a veces cuando la gente dice que, bueno, esto que más que responder busca abrir nuevas preguntas, es como, vale, sí, pero también está bien intentar responder, intentar buscar soluciones desde la acción, algunas de las preguntas que se van planteando, no todas, no hace falta ser tan ambicioso, pero me parece interesante buscar también respuestas. Y lo que fuimos navegando a través de las preguntas que habían salido de las asambleas que habíamos tenido online, fuimos poniéndolas sobre la mesa y bueno, aquí veis cómo realmente funcionó la posibilidad de mezclar estos colectivos y podéis ver las distintas mesas de trabajo que se configuraron. Fue muy bonito poder trabajar con distintas personas de cada uno de los distintos colectivos de manera conjunta. Son todo fotos de ese día, fue un día muy guay, nos gusta mucho enseñar esas fotos. Y para terminar, sobre todo con el eje de la pregunta en el centro como disparador, como herramienta de movilización. hacia adelante. Y queríamos, bueno, quiero darle el paso a Theo, porque ellos han enmarcado un poco Raising Care como plataforma en la que estuvieron participando estos distintos colectivos, un poco la idea y cómo funcionábamos como plataforma, pero quizás es interesante entrar en algunas de las prácticas de una manera más detallada. Entonces, Theo os va a situar en las prácticas específicas y particulares, ya no dentro de la plataforma Raising Care, sino en su contexto, porque es interesante también entender que Raising Care era una descontextualización de las prácticas de cada uno de estos colectivos, que esto puede ser un poco conflictuante en relación a todo lo que estábamos enmarcando de esta metodología muy anclada a un contexto particular, con lo cual creemos que es interesante también hablar de los colectivos fuera de su práctica de Raising Care. No sé si Theo, ¿estás por ahí? Hola, Theo. Hi, Theo.
Hi, thank you so much, Maddalena and Elena. And can we go back to the previous slide, if it's possible, of Jesus there on the rooftop of La Vellana? So hello from Athens. I wish I was there. I mean, we have to be online still for many other reasons rather than COVID. But there is an interesting. If we go back to the slide with Jesus, the next one, there's an interesting question there of what is no, front, yes, no, the other way. Yeah, it says here with a black marker, what is work? So let's go to the next slide of the Open School for Immigrants of Piraeus. And this is a photo from, I think, around 2011. I'm a volunteer in the school from 2016. And the school started in 2005. But trying to connect with that question that Jesus was holding, what is work? How can we make work visible? How can, by making it visible, make it better? And how can we make this appear through language? Right? So this was the questions that the comrades that established the school back in 2005 in a small sort of office somewhere in Piraeus were trying to engage with. How can we make this appear? How can we offer to our fellow co-citizens the tools of language, of access to language, of being able to syntax language in order to make the conditions that we all work better. Of course, the state back then, Athens was like on the hype of the Olympic Games, a lot of wasted infrastructure going around, riding waves of cheap credit, the EU, Schengen, freedom of movement, and so on. But somehow in some neighborhood of Piraeus, some of our older comrades were thinking, okay, what is missing? What is lacking here? Who has access to what? So for me, the act of questioning is a matter of thinking of access. So I will introduce three of our collectives, the Open School for Immigrants of Piraeus, Obiezione Respinta, and SCART, and talk about questioning in these three, how I understand questioning in these three collectives and the three attempts. I can speak better about the school because I'm involved in its almost day-to-day operations. I'm a board member now, you know, having to, like, for example, on Saturday we have gone clean because some of the kids broke in our offices. We are housed in a high school building, in a state building. So we can go to the next slide and see the courtyard of this building. So in the next slide that we see now, we see the courtyard of a high school in Piraeus, and it's actually a high school in Pallia Kokkinia, which is a migrant area since the 1920s. So migrants coming from Minor Asia, from Turkey to Greece. It's also the site of a horrible crime in the Second World War, occupation of Athens by the Nazi army, known as the blockade of Coquignac, where 300 of our comrades were being executed in the main square, very near the school. And in many ways, you know, these histories continue to inspire us in the school. But let's go back a little bit to 2005. So this is starting, the state doesn't have any sort of desire or design to provide language classes to people coming from migratory backgrounds. And then, of course, this is 10 years before the migrant wave crisis of 2015, and already some years before the 2010 Greek crisis, which, going back to what Maddalena was saying, was really an end of a world. It delivered 50% reduction to the wealth of the working class. So it had to completely reorganizing society in understanding, you know, how we have access to what are our tools, where do we have space, how do we organize space in order to survive. However, the school continues to operate within this perpetual crisis with different peaks and establishes a way to offer language learning courses, mainly of Greek, but also of many other languages that students then teach, and human rights, and then cultural activities, and dance, and theater, and art, and all these other activities that we provided. I wanna maybe highlight one moment in 2015 where we enter the Skaramakas camp, which was a refugee camp, and we try to instigate, along with our comrades in there, a school run by the camp itself. Of course, after we had to face attacks by Golden Dawn, and before we managed to put them temporarily in prison. And then, out of all these experiences that were very severe, COVID came, and the school sort of collapsed. So a school that had like 800 students in the weekend in this public school building. Let's go to the next slide. We see another fiesta photo to see like how we're joyous and happy, and then COVID comes and we have to completely reorganize. We have to find new ways to achieve what we can see in the next slide, which is, you know, a feeling of being together in space, of occupying classrooms of a public school together, and learning together. So in this time, you know, we have to find new tools, we have to organize differently, and we have to question, how do we organize differently after 18 years of practice? How do we organize against the new government, closing again people in closed camps? How do we organize where there's new migration policies to create organized labor like in Qatar? How do we organize against this current government denying second generation rights that we managed to, after a lot of fight, have like some years ago? How do we organize again? So, you know, we try to completely shift our practices, and our board is filled with ex-students who are finally getting papers after all those years. So we are seeing an eventual reorganizing of our organization, leading to a moment where we have elections in a month, and we have the highest number of candidate MPs coming from a migratory background. So this is a breakthrough moment. But let's go to the next slide and move to Italy, to Versione Respinta. I'm going to do a little bit of a fast sort of thing, because I see also time is running out, and it would be great to have some time to discuss. So apologies to the translators if you translating me in Spanish. I'm gonna go quite fast here. So Versione Respinta is a collective that emerges. It's a practice that emerges in COVID. And if we go to the next slide, we see how there is of course, it exists also in physical space. But if we go to the next slide, we see that it really is a tool for accessing digital space, questioning access to space through providing digital tools. So we see here, let's stay here in the next, next slide. In the example city of Pisa, where a lot of our communities from Versione are based. So we see how one can navigate through the different access points to pharmacies or to clinics and we go to the next slide and we see some information of what's going on in this point. Is there access to contraception or not? What's going on? It's an amazing tool. What's going on with mobilizing against for or against the space? So the comrades were telling us stories that, for example, when a pharmacy was really heavy on refusal, that they will organize a state mobilization, like the next slide, and they will see, you know, like kind of shifting attitudes. And in some cases, a pharmacy will change its policy after having, after facing this strategy, no? So it's not only an access of tools and space, but it's also a provision of a space for action. With an effect in both spaces, which is an amazing attribute that Obsession Respinta brought to our discussions of how do we mobilize ourselves in multiplicities. And I think this is a great pass for the next collective SCART. SCART in Serbo-Croatian, in Serbian is the scarto, is the leftover, is what is not useful anymore. And I think here we're entering another dimension of what is useful in these strategies. You know, how can we reorganize the idea of usefulness in this accessing? So how we can use art as a tool to questioning access to aesthetic practices while in a time of war. And I think that what SCART gave us, we'll go to the next slide. Oh no, so let's stay in the coupon, sorry, excuse me. We'll go to the one was just before. Thank you so much, Elena. So SCART started the practice in the early 90s while Yugoslavia was breaking up, and we had to find strategies to create projects within this war-torn society and very hard environments. And one of the most famous works that was also the background of our one of our digital media for the Raising Care process was these beautiful coupons that were given, spread in villages and cities around Serbia. So we see coupons for revolution, coupons for orgasm, coupons for miracles. I don't know what's going on locally in your territories, but even this right-wing government here in Greece was forced to give coupons to fight the increasing prices and inflation due to the war. But let's go now to the next slide of SCART and see how these aesthetic practices start entering a real space. So it's a collaboration that SCART have been doing with different groups in Serbia. So with Women in Black, which is an anti-war group for many years now. And here they're working with people in their later stages of their lives, pensioners. So here they're working with a group of women who are creating this beautiful handmade stitching works, and they work with choirs. Now we go to the next slide, where we see how they create strategies of puppet theater along with people. Here is in an elder home in Serbia. And then the next slide is a still from one of these animations, which says it's nice to share, which I think like goes to a very core approach to what we're talking about. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm gonna just try to perform a little bit what SCART tried to do at our meeting at the Levillana de Vallecas, which they created a core game between the two groups on the rooftop that you saw earlier. And it says, dare to cheer, don't just stare, dare to cheer, here and there and everywhere. Sharing is caring, caring is sharing, sharing is what? I'm gonna stop here because I know that we talked a lot of times with Elena what to do with singing in the presentations, but I would like to finish here with a beautiful moment from the rooftop of Levillana de Vallecas, where another of our collective Territorio Domestico invited us to a sing and dance moment together towards the end of our gathering, and I will let you see this, but before that I would like to pose a question to think while you watch this, so maybe you can bring in the discussion after, of collective practices that you are participating or that are around you that bring those tools that we described in our session, because it will be great for us to get to know other practices and discuss them with you, not only tonight, but hopefully in the days, weeks, months ahead together. So let's play the last slide and the video, and thank you so much for your patience.
No le vamos a poner cuerpo y música, pero todo el mundo bailar, ¿eh?
They are putting the body and the music to the letters of the song, but please everybody to support them on dancing and singing.
Porque hay resistencia.
Dancing with the sister.
El paro del viento contra la tierra, como te cantamos mismo y no más exploración. Te hallan los vientos y ves que te hallan los vientos.
Vale, pues sería el momento para invitaros a decir, hacer, preguntar cualquier cosa. No sé si alguien tiene una pregunta.
Si quieren podemos abrir un momentito de preguntas o nos vamos a hacer un break de 10 minutos. ¿Qué prefieren hacer? ¿Alguien tiene algún comentario?
¿No?
Ahí está, venga.
Vaya.
No, rápida. Muchas gracias, Elena, Theo. La verdad es que es genial revivir estas cosas en todos los formatos posibles, ¿no? Estos momentos tan enérgicos. La pregunta es sencilla. Yo creo que el momento tan chulo que nos dimos en la Villana estaba como muy condicionado precisamente por lo que ha explicado Elena, ¿no? Esa situación post-pandémica, ¿no? En la que esa necesidad de abrazo y de afecto era casi lo que nos condicionaba, ¿no? Lo que nos movía. Bueno, la pregunta para Theo, para Elena o para todas, ¿no? Es si pensáis que eso es trasladable ahora o ese momento especial post-pandémico nos llenó de amor y nos provocó esa especie de momento especial.
Si quieres me lanzo, porque no sé si están... Ay, yo es que no sé si sé hacer esto de como de recoger muchas preguntas y responderlas a la vez.
Era más como... Era como una respuesta a Pablo a través de una cosa que ha dicho Madu, ¿no? He hecho como there is always care in conflict. Siempre hay como cuidado en el conflicto. Y la pregunta que ha hecho Pablo es cómo sigue siendo pertinente ahora traer como esta experiencia. Pues yo le doy un poco la vuelta al statement de Madu, ¿no? Y digo lo contrario, ¿no? Como que siempre hay conflicto y por tanto siempre debe haber cuidado. Así que si quieres que hagamos más fiestas, Pablo. ¿Ese es el objetivo?
Sí, yo de hecho ahora mirando el vídeo hay algo como que me deja muy mal cuerpo. O sea, cuando empieza a aparecer gente con mascarillas, gente que no sabe bien qué hacer, como muchas ganas de estar, pero a la vez la gente todavía muy, muy distante. Así que ya no es que lo vea como algo que ha pasado y que en su momento fue necesario y ahora ya no. Que veo que todavía estamos como como un poco como lo que dice Ana, ¿no? De que sigue siendo necesario siempre este tipo de momento de encuentro, no solo por la fiesta, sino por el sentirte acompañada y que no estás sola en muchas de las cosas que haces en tu día a día. Es eso, es como yo ahora mismo firmaba por volver a hacer eso, pero ahora, ¿no? Porque lo estaba viendo y realmente era como, hostia. Ya la imagen de la reunión online se me hacía rara, vernos como en este momento intermedio que sí, pero no, se me ha hecho muy duro. No sé si queréis comentar alguna otra cosa o si Theo, Maddalena quieren hacer algún aporte en relación a lo que ha comentado Ana o Pablo. Theo dice que por su parte no. No sé si Maddalena quiere como responder alguna cosa.
Eccomi. No, I think you said exactly what I was thinking, and also I want to add this. I don't feel that really great moment of gathering was something so apart from the pandemic condition, of course, but was something so different from what we experience every day in our practices. So when you know, in difficult situation, party and happiness and also irony is kind of a crucial characteristic in order, is a glue, no, that helps us to survive, to not just to survive, but to live, no, to rise the quality of our encounters.
If I may add on this on the issue of quality, I think this is a you know, negotiation that this collective does on how it approaches this relation between quantity and quality within its own structure. So, for example, you know, like it seems there's always a deficit in an internal assembly, like not enough people are there to do all the work, but it seems to be like the same issue in every organization. But however, there seems to be always a moment where this quantitative question of structure becomes a transformative qualitative issue. And I think that what was interesting in the process of Raise Care in that sense was that the gathering at La Villana was a quantitative difference in the sense of how fast we had to engage with each other, because okay, we invited we had the 6 collectives that we've been working on for a year, but then we invited people from situated practices in Madrid that joined us, and together we did create a lot of new questions and a lot of new ideas in the space of a few hours. And for me, that was a qualitative, a huge step in our process. No, it didn't. I'm not saying this to deny the slow and very deep steps that we do in all our collectives and practices. But I think the moments of coming together, the joy and the joy of being together. I don't know. I cannot put it in words. I'm lacking the tools right now to give it a form. But that's why I thought that you know, some of the aesthetic devices, like the ones that Territorio use, no, in their everyday practice, are amazing ways to mobilize this qualitative question.
Hay una pregunta por aquí, así que si quieres.
Sí. ¿Se oye? Sí.
Sí.
Vale, no sé muy bien cómo formular la pregunta, a ver si consigo explicaros. Siempre que me encuentro con este tipo de prácticas, muchas veces pienso que a veces estos colectivos están ahí haciendo un trabajo que no está cubierto por lo público, ¿no? Como que hay un problema y hay colectivos que están solucionando, bueno, colectivos e individuos que están intentando cubrir ese espacio. Entonces,
siempre me entra la duda como de cuál sería como la petición que se hace desde estos colectivos hacia a lo público, al Estado, lo que sea, como esta idea de ¿tiene que ser este trabajo remunerado o no? Porque también creo que hay valor en este trabajo que se hace de una forma no remunerada y como fuera de las estructuras típicas, pero a la vez también hay veces que puede ser que gracias a este trabajo se siga funcionando el sistema de una manera precaria, ¿no? O sea, de hecho, en la pandemia, en el discurso de Pedro Sánchez de cuando se impuso el toque de queda y todo, hablaba de cómo la crisis económica en España la habían sostenido mucho los abuelos y hacía como esta llamada como a la responsabilidad de ahora toca al resto de la población como devolver esto porque ellos son los vulnerables y no sé qué. Y es como que sí, que obviamente había que hacerlo en ese momento, pero bueno, no sé, me entra esta duda y me preguntaba si dentro de vuestra plataforma pues es algo que discutís o como qué posiciones soléis tener en torno a esto.
Si quieres me lanzo, pero no va a ser una evasiva. Es que esto lo hemos discutido, por ejemplo, mucho con Theo en relación a la función que hace la Open School. Entonces, creo que es una discusión que Theo puede hilar un poco, porque sí que es uno de estos proyectos que realmente cubre algo que tendría que ser lógico, que no tendría que recaer en ellas como colectivo. Entonces, no sé si Theo, ¿quieres hacer algún apunte sobre esto?
I think it's a very interesting question. We have been continuously I mean, the school is operating purely on volunteer. I mean, before the pandemic, we were like 40 volunteers. Now we're like 30. We reject funding, money from the state, from NGOs, from non-profits and stuff. As a general, this is our general attitude. Of course, we collaborate with people, and in those maybe in those terms, then there could be such a thing, but we generally reject, and we reject in order to be able to sustain ourselves, because if you get a grant 1 year and then the next year you don't get it, what do? How do you rescale, for example? This is not the main reason we don't accept funding. I mean, I think it's obvious why we don't accept funding, but and there are other ways to create an economy. For one of our members of the Solidarity Schools Network, Mesopotamia, operates with a time bank, for example. On the other hand, personally as an artist, when I listen to this question, and very recently we just started a union of artists and curators here in Greece that we didn't have one before due to some peculiar issues here. On the other hand, I find myself, one half of myself arguing for fair fees, and for fees, So as an artist, I go and argue for fees and fair fees, and as IRI, we argue for universal basic income. As a school, we argue for a completely disconnected activity from an economy in order to be autonomous and in order to protect a lot of our students and volunteers from such an economy. So it's a very complex question, the one of economy, and we find ourselves navigating through very different roles and through the very different systems of how to respond to such question. To give a final answer to this is that of course, these structures, like the school, for example, we are now able, after all those years, to give a certificate of attendance that is used by our students to prove that they've been in Greece for some time, to go through the process of the bureaucracy, and so on, and to give exams for citizenship and so on. So, I mean, we are performing a part of the state, and of course, the state is using us in providing this to people, but on the same time, we are using this power to provide other things to our students and to us, to all of us. We gain the capacity to propose a model of education to the state, no, to the society. So it's a very complex question. Thank you for this very important question of how do we approach economy with this and how the state revalorizes such attempts. But I think it is exactly in these complex relationships that we have the capacity to negotiate the production of other systems, like, for example, our approach to cultural commons, to education as a common, and so on. So, I don't know.
Can I add something?
Well,
No, see, sorry, I just want to add something to that question, which I thanks because it is indeed one of the main questions, and it sounds like we are necessary, but perhaps are we unwillingly participating to the dismantle of the public sector? No, and this is one of the questions that, let's say, struggle all of us, no? So there are several answers to this. For instance, I want to take some examples. Sea-Watch, when they answer to this question, they in a really straight way, they say, we shouldn't exist, punto. And this is quite a strong one. Another answer, and probably is the one that was characterizing most of the community we have inside, is that many of these communities are doing both the work. So they have this double burden of making solidarity platform, but also fighting for enlarging welfare state. For instance, let's talk about Convention 189, Convention 189, in which territorio domestico is one of the most important subjects that conceive equal labor rights and social protection for domestic workers in Spain, no? A law that, for instance, in Italy is not even there. Or other subjects that, for instance, obiezione respinta, who during the pandemic denounced, as Theo showed you, the lack of access to abortion right, but at the same time conceived to bring in Italy after 10 years, according to the average of the Europe states, the abortion pill. We didn't have abortion pill until the pandemic. So obiezione respinta is a subject, a very important subject that did that work. So my personal answer when trying to figure out this amletic question is that I go to see in past times, and if I look at the, for instance, the Italian story, and if I go to one of the most important state reform that occurred in 1978, the healthcare state reform, the universal healthcare for all, which already now is in danger, but blah, 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 at that time was really revolutionary. That law was made by movements, feminist movements, students, but also institution, experts into the institution. So by a mix of practices and bodies and thoughts that come from different grounds. So I think that probably this question is a main question, but also sometimes a false flag. I don't know if it's clear, like it creates a dichotomy that shouldn't exist. Thank you.
I want to just connect the dots from this point and also then to bridge on the second part of the day. Just, I want to say that when we speak about rights, when rights are recognized by law, this is just theory, as long as the implementation of that right is possible, meaning putting economies to really implement the right. So one, for example, of the things we discussed yesterday about the claim for the universal and unconditional basic income is one of the claims to recognize all the reproductive work that nature does, that people do in our being and living together. So it's just, of course, we're in the same cycle of thought, but I would just remain on this thing, and it's not monetizing life. It's not about the monetization of life, but it's about being serious about rights. So I think, let me bridge you all to maybe a break. Thank you, everybody. And we can take 10 minutes and we'll start with the second part. If you are with us, we will start with 10 minutes, finishing with radical ecologies, the part yesterday that wasn't time to finish. We'll keep the intervention shorter, and then we'll go towards the common and the juridical tools and strategies and final part. Thank you for your participation. Take a break and we see us in 10 minutes here. Thank you guys over there. It was great.
Thank you. We were there, really.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.